I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine. I also have a master's in transpersonal psychology, which coincides more with the message that I want to share with you today. If you're new to the term transpersonal psychology, you can think of it more as a spiritual, a cultural, or holistic aspect to psychology. And now for my message. Since ancient times, cultures have used stories or myth to relate to all or a part of human life. These stories are usually centered around deities that influence us through symbolism or metaphor. In our Western culture, many people use the stories in the Bible to relate to. People gather together in Bible study, pick a scripture, and share their experience of how this has influenced them. As a woman, these stories are okay, but I believe there is a better story to relate to. I discovered a story of a goddess from 5,000 years ago. This is about a woman who is empowered and courageous. I want to share with you how I discovered her story because it's quite dynamic. But today I am going to share the part of my life that I related to her story to help me be strong in difficult times. About 5 years ago, my husband and I married. Just before we married, I started researching Ainana's story and used this book to help me do a lot of the research. It's the prose of her story, and I also looked on the internet. I was writing my master's thesis and only used a section of this myth. In her story, in Ainana's story, in her midlife, she too gets married. Although not long after, Ainana hears a call to visit the underworld. I related to this call in my own life because when I married, I moved 2 hours away to start a new life with my husband. This didn't go how I planned. In fact, I experienced a series of circumstances that related to my family life, which left me emotionally distraught. I wasn't bringing in any income there, and my financial situation was looking very dim. It felt like my power and my wit were dwindling, and I was spinning out of control. My marriage, too, suffered as a result of this. When Ainana travels to the underworld, she must go through 7 chambers. In each of these chambers, Ainana removes a part of her person. She is stripped of her spiritual nature and her divine powers. This is comparable to the phrase people use of peeling away the layers of an onion when someone is undergoing a life-changing transformation. This is exactly how I felt, that my layers of my soul were being peeled away. Then suddenly, a terrible tragedy happened. My stepson committed suicide. He was only 20 years old. This tragedy literally knocked the wind out of my lungs. In one breath, I was able to be supportive for my husband in his deep loss, and in another breath, I felt paralyzed. The loss of my stepson felt like my own inner death. I was deeply depressed, and I had no support. When Ainana reaches the underworld, she visits her sister, the goddess of the underworld, and Ereshkigal fastens the eye of death on her. Ainana is left hanging on a peg to rot. However, she remembers her only saving grace is to call on her father, the God of wisdom, to rescue her, and he does. Just as I was at my wit's end, I remembered Ainana's story, and I realized that I needed to call on my own inner wisdom and pray for divine guidance. That was my only hope. By reaching out, I began to heal. Thankfully, I had a story that I could relate to help me recognize that suffering and adversity are a part of life. Since then, I have committed to identifying with Ainana's story. In fact, I've written a whole book about this process and how beneficial it has been for my life. I think the stories of women in the Bible are okay, but Ainana's story is about the development of a woman's whole life. I could relate to her story because it emphasized my strength, my courage, and most importantly, it helped me feel empowered. Ainana's myth was found on clay tablets back in the 1920s, and scholars pieced it together and translated it. Her story is rich with symbolism and its deep meaning. At times it can even be erotic. I one day want to share her story with you. I think everybody can relate to Ainana's story. It's not just for women. If you're interested, I invite you to read my book and to also participate in my 7-week class. This is going to help people come together and share their experiences of how this myth helps them in their life. Thank you, and I am confident you will be amazed at how powerful this process can be for you. Goodbye.